Look, Eli, Ted said finally. He changes, okay? All right. But they're still up there, aren't they? That doesn't change. The point is you won't know it. Patiently, Ted said, is this what we asked of you, Eli? When we put our faith and trust in you, is that what we were asking? We weren't concerned that this guy should become a Beau Brummel, Eli. Believe me, we just don't think this is the community for them. And Eli, we isn't me. The Jewish members of the community appointed me, Artie, and Harry to see what could be done, and we appointed you. And what's happened? Eli heard himself say, what happened, happened. Eli, you're talking in crossword puzzles. My wife's having a baby, Eli explained defensively. I realize that, Eli, but this is a matter of zoning, isn't it? Isn't that what we discovered? You don't abide by the ordinance, you go. I mean, I can't raise mountain goats, say, in my backyard. This isn't so simple, Ted. People are involved. People? Eli, we've been through this and through this. We're not just dealing with people. These are religious fanatics is what they are, dressing like that. What I'd really like to find out is what goes on up there. I'm getting more and more skeptical, Eli, and I'm not afraid to admit it. It smells like a lot of hocus-pocus abracadabra stuff to me. Guys like Harry, you know, they think and they're afraid to admit what they're thinking. I'll tell you, look, I don't even know about this Sunday school business. Sundays I drive my oldest kid all the way to Scarsdale to learn Bible stories. And you know what she comes up with? This Abraham in the Bible was going to kill his own kid for a sacrifice. She gets nightmares from it, for God's sake. You call that religion? Today a guy like that, they'd lock him up. This is an age of science, Eli. I size people's feet with an X-ray machine, for God's sake. They've disproved all that stuff, Eli, and I refuse to sit by and watch it happening on my own front lawn. Nothing's happening on your front lawn, Teddy. You're exaggerating. Nobody's sacrificing their kid. You're damn right, Eli. I'm not sacrificing mine. You'll see when you have your own what it's like. All the place is a hideaway for people who can't face life. It's a matter of needs. They have all these superstitions. And why do you think? Because they can't face the world. Because they can't take their place in society. That's no environment to bring up kids in, Eli. Look, Ted, see it from another angle. We can convert them, Eli said with half a heart. What? Make a bunch of Catholics out of them? Look, Eli, pal, there's a good, healthy relationship in this town because it's modern Jews and Protestants. That's the point, isn't it, Eli? Let's not kid each other. I'm not Harry. The way things are now are fine, like human beings. There's going to be no pogroms in Woodington, right? Because there's no fanatics, no crazy people. Eli winced and closed his eye a second. Just people who respect each other and leave each other be. Common sense is the ruling thing, Eli. I'm for common sense. Moderation. Exactly, Ted. I agree. But common sense, maybe, says make this guy change his clothes. Then maybe common sense says that. Common sense says to me, they go and find a nice place somewhere else, Eli. New York is the biggest city in the world. It's only 30 miles away. Why don't they go there? Ted, give them a chance. Introduce them to common sense. Eli, you're dealing with fanatics. Do they display common sense? Talking a dead language, that makes sense? Making a big thing out of suffering, so you're going oi, oi, oi all your life, that's common sense? Look, Eli, we've been through all this. I don't know if you know, but there's talk that Life magazine is sending a guy out to the yeshiva for a story with pictures. Look, Teddy, you're letting your imagination get inflamed. I don't think Life's interested. But I'm interested, Eli, and we thought you were supposed to be. I am, Eli said. I am. Let him just change the clothes, Ted. Let's see what happens. They live in the medieval ages, Eli. It's some superstition, some rule. Let's just see, Eli pleaded. Eli, every day. One more day, Eli said. If he doesn't change in one more day, what? Then I get an injunction first thing Monday. That's that. Look, Eli, it's not up to me. Let me call Harry. You're the spokesman, Teddy. I'm all wrapped up here with Miriam having a baby. Just give me the day. The day. All right, Eli. I want to be fair. But tomorrow, that's all. Tomorrow's the judgment day, Eli, I'm telling you. I hear trumpets, Eli said and hung up. He was shaking inside. Teddy's voice seemed to have separated his bones at the joints. He was still in the phone booth when the nurse came to tell him that Mrs. Peck would positively not be delivered of a child until the morning. He was to go home and get some rest. He looked like he was having the baby. The nurse winked and left. But Eli did not go home. He carried the Bonwit box out into the street with him and put it in the car. The night was soft and starry, and he began to drive the streets of Woodinton. Square, cool windows, apricot-colored, were all one could see beyond the long lawns that fronted the homes of the townsmen. The stars polished the permanent baggage carriers atop the station wagons in the driveways. He drove slowly, up, down, around. Only his tires could be heard taking the gentle curves in the road. What peace, what incredible peace. Have children ever been so safe in their beds? Parents, Eli wondered, so full in their stomachs? Water so warm in its boilers? Never. Never in Rome, never in Greece. Never even did walled cities have it so good. No wonder, then, they would keep things just as they were. Here, after all, were peace and safety, what civilization had been working toward for centuries. For all his jerkiness, that was all Ted Heller was asking for, peace and safety. It was what his parents had asked for in the Bronx, and his grandparents in Poland, and theirs in Russia or Austria, or wherever else they'd fled to or from. It was what Miriam was asking for. And now they had it. The world was at last a place for families, even Jewish families. After all these centuries, maybe there just had to be this communal toughness or numbness to protect such a blessing. Maybe that was the trouble with the Jews all along. Too soft. Sure, to live takes guts, Eli was thinking as he drove on beyond the train station and parked his car at the darkened Gulf station. He stepped out, carrying the box. At the top of the hill, one window trembled with light. What was Zuref doing up there in that office? Killing babies? Probably not. But studying a language no one understood, practicing customs with origins long forgotten, suffering sufferings already suffered once too often. Teddy was right. Why keep it up? However, if a man chose to be stubborn, then he couldn't expect to survive. The world is give and take. What sense to sit and brood over a suit? Eli would give him one last chance. He stopped at the top. No one was around. He walked slowly up the lawn, setting each foot into the grass, listening to the shh his shoes made as they bent the wetness into the sod. He looked around. Here there was nothing. Nothing. An old decaying house and a suit. On the porch, he slid behind a pillar. He felt someone was watching him, but only the stars gleamed down. And at his feet, off and away, Woodinton glowed up. He set his package on the step of the great front door. Inside the cover of the box, he felt to see if his letter was still there. When he touched it, he pushed it deeper into the green suit, which his fingers still remembered from winter. He should have included some light bulbs. Then he slid back by the pillar again, and this time there was something on the lawn. It was the second sight he had of him. He was facing Woodinton and barely moving across the open space toward the trees. His right fist was beating his chest, and then Eli heard a sound rising with each knock on the chest. What a moan! It could raise hair, stop hearts, water eyes. And it did all three to Eli, plus more. Some feeling crept into him for whose deepness he could find no word. It was strange. He listened. It did not hurt to hear this moan, but he wondered if it hurt to make it. And so, with only stars to hear, he tried. And it did hurt. Not the bumblebee of noise that turned at the back of his throat and winged out his nostrils. What hurt buzzed down. It stung and stung inside him, and in turn the moan sharpened, became a scream louder, a song, a crazy song that whined through the pillars and blew out to the grass until the strange hatted creature on the lawn turned and threw his arms wide and looked in the night like a scarecrow. Eli ran, and when he reached the car, the pain was only a bloody scratch across his neck where a branch had whipped back as he fled the greenie's arms. The following day his son was born, but not till 1 in the afternoon, and by then a great deal had happened. First, at 9:30 the phone rang. Eli leaped from the sofa, where he'd dropped the night before, and picked it screaming from the cradle. He could practically smell the hospital as he shouted into the phone, "Hello, yes?" "Eli, it's Ted." "Eli, he did it. He just walked by the store. I was opening the door, Eli, and I turned around and I swear I thought it was you. But it was him. He still walks like he did, but the clothes, Eli, the clothes." "Who?" "The greenie. He has on man's regular clothes, and the suit, it's a beauty." The suit barreled back into Eli's consciousness, pushing all else aside. "What color suit?" "Green. He's just strolling in the green suit like it's a holiday." "Eli, is it a Jewish holiday?" "Where is he now?" "He's walking straight up Coach House Road in this damn tweed job, Eli. It worked, you were right." "We'll see." "What next?" "We'll see." He took off the underwear in which he'd slept and went into the kitchen, where he turned the light under the coffee. When it began to perk, he held his head over the pot so it would steam loose the knot back of his eyes. It still hadn't when the phone rang. "Eli, Ted again. Eli, the guy's walking up and down every street in town. Really, he's on a tour or something. Artie called me, Herb called me. Now Shirley calls that he just walked by our house. Eli, go out on the porch, you'll see." Eli went to the window and peered out. He couldn't see past the bend in the road, and there was no one in sight. "Eli?" He heard Ted from where he dangled over the telephone table. He dropped the phone into the hook as a few last words floated up to him. "Eli, you saw him?" He threw on the pants and shirt he'd worn the night before and walked barefoot onto his front lawn. And sure enough, his apparition appeared around the bend. In a brown hat a little too far down on his head, a green suit too far back on the shoulders, an unbuttoned-down button-down shirt, a tie knotted so as to leave a 2-inch tail, trousers that cascaded onto his shoes. He was shorter than that black hat had made him seem, and moving the clothes was that walk that was not a walk, the tiny stepped schlumpy gait. He came round the bend, and for all his strangeness, it clung to his whiskers, signaled itself in his locomotion. He looked as if he belonged. Eccentric, maybe, but he belonged. He made no moan, nor did he invite Eli with wide-flung arms. But he did stop when he saw him. He stopped and put a hand to his hat. When he felt for its top, his hand went up too high. Then it found the level and fiddled with the brim. The fingers fiddled, fumbled, and when they'd finally made their greeting, they traveled down the fellow's face and in an instant seemed to have touched each one of his features. They dabbed the eyes, ran the length of the nose, swept over the hairy lip until they found their home in the hair that hid a little of his collar. To Eli the fingers said, "I have a face, at least." Then his hand came through the beard, and when it stopped at his chest, it was like a pointer, and the eyes asked the question as tides of water shifted over them. "The face is all right. I can keep it?" Such a look was in those eyes that Eli was still seeing them when he turned his head away. They were the hearts of his jonquils that only last week had appeared. They were the leaves on his birch, the bulbs in his coach lamp, the droppings on his lawn. Those eyes were the eyes in his head. They were his. He had made them. He turned and went into his house, and when he peeked out the side of the window, between shade and molding, the green suit was gone. The phone. "Eli, Shirley." "I saw him, Shirley," and he hung up. He sat frozen for a long time. The sun moved around the windows. The coffee steam smelled up the house. The phone began to ring, stopped, began again. The mailman came, the cleaner, the bakery man, the gardener, the ice cream man, the League of Women Voters lady. A Negro woman spreading some strange gospel calling for the revision of the Food and Drug Act knocked at the front, rapped at the windows, and finally scraped a half-dozen pamphlets under the back door. But Eli only sat, without underwear, in last night's suit. He answered no one. Given his condition, it was strange that the trip and crash at the back door reached his inner ear. But in an instant, he seemed to melt down into the crevices of the chair, then to splash up and out to where the clatter had been. At the door he waited. It was silent, but for a fluttering of damp little leaves on the trees. When he finally opened the door, there was no one there. He'd expected to see green, 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 big as the doorway, topped by his hat, waiting for him with those eyes. But there was no one out there, except for the Bonwitz box, which lay bulging at his feet. No string tied it, and the top rode high on the bottom. The coward! He couldn't do it. He couldn't. The very glee of that idea pumped fuel to his legs. He tore out across his back lawn, past his new spray of forsythia, to catch a glimpse of the bearded one fleeing naked through the yards, over hedges and fences to the safety of his hermitage. In the distance, a pile of pink and white stones, which Harriet Knudsen had painted the previous day, tricked him. "Run!" he shouted to the rocks. "Run, you—" But he caught his error before anyone else did, and though he peered and craned, there was no hint anywhere of a man about his own size, with white, terribly white skin. How white must be the skin of his body, in cowardly retreat. He came slowly, curiously back to the door, and while the trees shimmered in the light wind, he removed the top from the box. The shock at first was the shock of having daylight turned off all at once. Inside the box was an eclipse, but black soon sorted from black, and shortly there were the glassy black of lining, the coarse black of trousers, the dead black of fraying threads, and in the center, the mountain of black, the hat. He picked the box from the doorstep and carried it inside. For the first time in his life, he smelled the color of blackness. A little stale, a little sour, a little old, but nothing that could overwhelm you. Still, he held the package at arm's length and deposited it on the dining room table. 20 rooms on a hill, and they store their old clothes with me. What am I supposed to do with them? Give them to charity? That's where they came from. He picked up the hat by the edges and looked inside. The crown was smooth as an egg, the brim practically threadbare. There's nothing else to do with the hat in one's hands but put it on. So Eli dropped the thing on his head. He opened the door to the hall closet and looked at himself in the full-length mirror. The hat gave him bags under the eyes. Or perhaps he had not slept well. He pushed the brim lower till a shadow touched his lips. Now the bags under his eyes had inflated to become his face. Before the mirror he unbuttoned his shirt, unzipped his trousers, and then, shedding his clothes, he studied what he was. What a silly disappointment to see yourself naked in a hat, especially in that hat. He sighed, but could not rid himself of the great weakness that suddenly set on his muscles and joints beneath the terrible weight of the stranger's strange hat. He returned to the dining-room table and emptied the box of its contents. Jacket, trousers, and vest. It smelled deeper than blackness, and under it all, sticking between the shoes that looked chopped and bitten, came the first gleam of white. A little fringed serape, a gray piece of semi-underwear, was crumpled at the bottom, its thready border twisted into itself. Eli removed it and let it hang free. What is it? For warmth? To wear beneath underwear in the event of a chest cold? He held it to his nose, but it did not smell from Vicks or mustard plaster. It was something special, some Jewish thing. Special food, special language, special prayers. Why not special BVDs? So fearful was he that he would be tempted back into wearing his traditional clothes, reasoned Eli, that he had carried and buried in Woodenton everything, including the special underwear. For that was how Eli now understood the box of clothes. The greenie was saying, "Here, I give up. I refuse even to be tempted. We surrender." And that was how Eli continued to understand it until he found he'd slipped the white, fringy surrender flag over his hat and felt it clinging to his chest. And now, looking at himself in the mirror, he was momentarily uncertain as to who was tempting who into what. Why did the greenie leave his clothes? Was it even the greenie? Then who was it? And why? But Eli, for Christ's sake, in an age of science, things don't happen like that. Even the goddamn pigs take drugs. Regardless of who was the source of the temptation, what was its end, not to mention its beginning, Eli, some moments later, stood draped in black, with a little white underneath, before the full-length mirror. He had to pull down on the trousers so they would not show the hollow of his ankle. The greenie, didn't he wear socks? Or had he forgotten them? The mystery was solved when Eli mustered enough courage to investigate the trouser pockets. He had expected some damp, awful thing to happen to his fingers should he slip them down and out of sight. But when at last he jammed bravely down, he came up with a khaki army sock in each hand. As he slipped them over his toes, he invented a genesis. A GI's present in 1945, plus everything else lost between 1938 and 1945. He had also lost his socks. Not that he had lost the socks, but that he'd had to stoop to accepting these made Eli almost cry. To calm himself, he walked out the back door and stood looking at his lawn. On the Knutson back lawn, Harriet Knutson was giving her stones a second coat of pink. She looked up just as Eli stepped out. Eli shot back in again and pressed himself against the back door. When he peeked between the curtain, all he saw were paint bucket, brush, and rocks scattered on the Knutson's pink-spattered grass. The phone rang. Who was it? Harriet Knutson? Eli, there's a Jew at your door. That's me. Nonsense, Eli. I saw him with my own eyes. That's me. I saw you too, painting your rocks pink. Eli, you're having a nervous breakdown again. Jimmy, Eli's having a nervous breakdown again. Eli, this is Jimmy. Here you're having a little breakdown. Anything I can do, boy? Eli, this is Ted. Shirley says you need help. Eli, this is Artie. You need help. Eli, Harry, you need help. You need help. The phone rattled its last and died. God helps them who help themselves, intoned Eli. And once again he stepped out the door. This time he walked to the center of his lawn, and in full sight of the trees, the grass, the birds, and the sun, revealed that it was he, Eli, in the costume. But nature had nothing to say to him, and so stealthily he made his way to the hedge, separating his property from the field beyond, and he cut his way through, losing his hat twice in the underbrush. Then, clamping the hat to his head, he began to run, the threaded tassels jumping across his heart. He ran through the weeds and wildflowers until on the old road that skirted the town he slowed up. He was walking when he approached the Gulf station from the back. He supported himself on a huge tireless truck rim, and among tubes, rusted engines, dozens of topless oil cans, he rested. With a kind of brainless cunning, he readied himself for the last mile of his journey. "How are you, Pop?" was the garage attendant, rubbing his greasy hands on his overalls and hunting among the cans. Eli's stomach lurched, and he pulled the big black coat round his neck. "Nice day," the attendant said, and started around to the front. "Sholem," Eli whispered, and zoomed off toward the hill. The sun was directly overhead when Eli reached the top. He had come by way of the woods, where it was cooler, but still he was perspiring beneath his new suit. The hat had no sweatband, and the cloth clutched his head. The children were playing. The children were always playing, as if it was that alone that Tsurov had to teach them. In their shorts they revealed such thin legs that beneath one could see the joints swiveling as they ran. Eli waited for them to disappear around a corner before he came into the open. But something would not let him wait. His green suit. It was on the porch, wrapped around the bearded fellow who was painting the base of a pillar. His arm went up and down, and the pillar glowed like white fire. The very sight of him popped Eli out of the woods onto the lawn. He did not turn back, though his insides did. He walked up the lawn, but the children played on. Tipping the black hat, he mumbled, "Shh, shh," and they hardly seemed to notice. At last he smelled paint. He waited for the man to turn to him. He only painted. Eli felt suddenly that if he could pull the black hat down over his eyes, over his chest and belly and legs, if he could shut out all light, then a moment later he would be home in bed. But the hat wouldn't go past his forehead. He couldn't kid himself. He was there. No one he could think of had forced him to do this. The greenie's arms flailed up and down on the pillar. Eli breathed loudly, cleared his throat, but the greenie wouldn't make life easier for him. At last Eli had to say, "Hello." The arm swished up and down. It stopped. 2 fingers went out after a brush hair stuck to the pillar. "Good day," Eli said. The hair came away. The swishing resumed. "Sholem," Eli whispered, and the fellow turned. The recognition took some time. He looked at what Eli wore. Up close, Eli looked at what he wore. And then Eli had the strange notion that he was 2 people, or that he was one person wearing 2 suits. The greenie looked to be suffering from a similar confusion. They stared long at one another. Eli's heart shivered, and his brain was momentarily in such a mixed-up condition that his hands went out to button down the collar of his shirt that somebody else was wearing. What a mess. The greenie flung his arms over his face. "What's the matter?" Eli said. The fellow had picked up his bucket and brush and was running away. Eli ran after him. "I wasn't going to hit," Eli called. "Stop!" Eli caught up and grabbed his sleeve. Once again the greenie's hands flew up to his face. This time, in the violence, white paint spattered both of them. "I only want to—" But in that outfit, Eli didn't really know what he wanted. "To talk," he said finally. "For you to look at me. Please, just look at me." The hand stayed put as paint rolled off the brush onto the cuff of Eli's green suit. "Please, please," Eli said, but he did not know what to do. "Say something, speak English," he pleaded. The fellow pulled back against the wall, back, as though some arm would finally reach out and yank him to safety. He refused to uncover his face. "Look," Eli said, pointing to himself. "It's your suit. I'll take care of it." No answer, only a little shaking under the hands, which led Eli to speak as gently as he knew how. We'll moth-proof it. There's a button missing." Eli pointed. "I'll have it fixed. I'll have a zipper put in. Please, please, just look at me." He was talking to himself, and yet how could he stop? Nothing he said made any sense. That alone made his heart swell. Yet somehow, babbling on, he might babble something that would make things easier between them. "Look." He reached inside his shirt to pull the frills of underwear into the light. "I'm wearing the special underwear even. Please," he said. "Please, please, please," he sang, as if it were some sacred word. Oh, please. Nothing twitched under the tweed suit, and if the eyes watered or twinkled or hated, he couldn't tell. It was driving him crazy. He had dressed like a fool, and for what? For this? He reached up and yanked the hands away. There, he said, and in that first instant, all he saw of the greenie's face were two white droplets stuck to each cheek. Tell me, Eli clutched his hands down to his sides, tell me what I can do for you. I'll do it. Stiffly the greenie stood there, sporting his two white tears. Whatever I can do. Look what I've done already. He grabbed his black hat and shook it in the man's face. And in exchange, the greenie gave him an answer. He raised one hand to his chest, then jammed it, finger first, toward the horizon. And with what a pained look, as though the air were full of razors, Eli followed the finger and saw beyond the knuckle, out past the nail, Woodenton. What do you want? Eli said. I'll bring it. Suddenly the greenie made a run for it, but then he stopped, wheeled, and jabbed that finger at the air again. It pointed the same way. Then he was gone. And then, all alone, Eli had the revelation. He did not question his understanding, the substance or the source, but with a strange, dreamy elation, he started away. On Coach House Road, they were double parked. The mayor's wife pushed a grocery cart full of dog food from Stop and Shop to her station wagon. The president of the Lions Club, a napkin around his neck, was jamming pennies into the meter in front of the Bit in Teeth restaurant. Ted Heller caught the sun as it glazed off the new Byzantine mosaic entrance to his shoe shop. In pinkened jeans, Mrs. Jimmy Knutson was leaving Holloway's Hardware, a paint bucket in each hand. Roger's Beauty Shop had its doors open, women's heads in silver bullets far as the eye could see. Over by the barber shop, the pole spun, and Artie Berg's youngest sat on a red horse, having his hair cut. His mother flipped through looks, smiling. The greenie had changed his clothes. And into this street, which seemed paved with chromium, came Eli Peck. It was not enough, he knew, to walk up one side of the street. That was not enough. Instead, he walked 10 paces up one side, then on an angle crossed to the other side, where he walked 10 more paces and crossed back. Horns blew, traffic jerked, as Eli made his way up Coach House Road. He spun a moan high up in his nose as he walked. Outside, no one could hear him, but he felt it vibrate the cartilage at the bridge of his nose. Things slowed around him. The sun stopped rippling on spokes and hubcaps. It glowed steadily as everyone put on brakes to look at the man in black. They always paused and gaped whenever he entered the town. Then, in a minute or 2 or 3, a light would change, a baby squawk, and the flow continue. Now, though lights changed, no one moved. He shaved his beard, Eric the barber said. Who? Asked Linda Berg. The guy in the suit, from the place there. Linda looked out the window. It's Uncle Eli, little Kevin Berg said, spitting hair. Oh, God, Linda said. Eli's having a nervous breakdown. A nervous breakdown? Ted Heller said, but not immediately. Immediately he had said, holy. Shortly, everybody in Coach House Road was aware that Eli Peck, the nervous young attorney with a pretty wife, was having a breakdown. Everybody except Eli Peck. He knew what he did was not insane, though he felt every inch of its strangeness. He felt those black clothes as if they were the skin of his skin, the give and pull as they got used to where he bulged and buckled. And he felt eyes, every eye on Coach House Road. He saw headlights screech to within an inch of him and stop. He saw mouths. First the bottom jaw slides forward, then the tongue hits the teeth, the lips explode, a little thunder in the throat, and they've said it. Eli Peck, Eli Peck, Eli Peck, Eli Peck. He began to walk slowly, shifting his weight down and forward with each syllable. Eli Peck, Eli Peck, Eli Peck. Heavily he trod, and as his neighbors uttered each syllable of his name, he felt each syllable shaking all his bones. He knew who he was down to his marrow. They were telling him, Eli Peck. He wanted them to say it 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. He would walk forever in that black suit, as adults whispered of his strangeness, and children made, shame, shame, with their fingers. It's going to be all right, pal. Ted Heller was motioning to Eli from his doorway. Come on, pal. It's going to be all right. Eli saw him past the brim of his hat. Ted did not move from his doorway, but leaned forward and spoke with his hand over his mouth. Behind him, 3 customers peered through the doorway. Eli, it's Ted, remember? Ted. Eli crossed the street and found he was heading directly toward Harriet Knudsen. He lifted his neck so she could see his whole face. He saw her forehead melt down to her lashes. Good morning, Mr. Peck. Sholem, Eli said, and crossed the street where he saw the president of the Lions. Twice before, he heard someone say, and then he crossed again, mounted the curb, and was before the bakery where a delivery man charged past with a tray of powdered cakes twirling above him. Pardon me, father, he said, and scooted into his truck. But he could not move it. Eli Peck had stopped traffic. He passed the Rivoli Theater, Beekman Cleaners, Harris's Westinghouse, the Unitarian Church, and soon he was passing only trees. At Ireland Road he turned right and started through Woodington's winding streets. Baby carriages stopped whizzing and creaked. Isn't that... Gardeners held their clipping. Children stepped from the sidewalk and tried the curb. And Eli greeted no one, but raised his face to all. He wished passionately that he had white tears to show them, and not till he reached his own front lawn, saw his house, his shutters, his new jonquils, did he remember his wife, and the child that must have been born to him. And it was then and there he had the awful moment. He could go inside and put on his clothes and go to his wife in the hospital. It was not irrevocable. Even the walk wasn't. In Woodington, memories are long, but fury short. Apathy works like forgiveness. Besides, when you flipped, you flipped. It's Mother Nature. What gave Eli the awful moment was that he turned away. He knew exactly what he could do, but he chose not to. To go inside would be to go halfway. There was more. So he turned and walked toward the hospital, and all the time he quaked 1/8 of an inch beneath his skin to think that perhaps he'd chosen the crazy way. To think that he'd chosen to be crazy. But if you chose to be crazy, then you weren't crazy. It's when you didn't choose. No, he wasn't flipping. He had a child to see. Name? Peck. 4th floor. He was given a little blue card. In the elevator, everybody stared. Eli watched his black shoes rise 4 floors. 4. He tipped his hat, but knew he couldn't take it off. Peck, he said. He showed the card. Congratulations, the nurse said. The grandfather? The father. Which room? She led him to 412. A joke on the missus, she said, but he slipped in the door without her. Miriam? Yes? Eli? She rolled her white face towards her husband. Oh, Eli. Oh, Eli. He raised his arms. What could I do? You have a son. They called all morning. I came to see him. Like that? She whispered harshly. Eli, you can't go around like that. I have a son. I want to see him. Eli, why are you doing this to me? Red seeped back into her lips. He's not your fault, she explained. Oh, Eli, sweetheart, why do you feel guilty about everything? Eli, change your clothes. I forgive you. Stop forgiving me. Stop understanding me. But I love you. That's something else. But, sweetie, you don't have to dress like that. You didn't do anything. You don't have to feel guilty because everything's all right. Eli, can't you see that? Miriam, enough reasons. Where's my son? Oh, please, Eli, don't flip now. I need you now. Is that why you're flipping? Because I need you? In your selfish way, Miriam, you're very generous. I want my son. Don't flip now. I'm afraid now that he's out. She was beginning to whimper. I don't know if I love him now that he's out. When I look in the mirror, Eli, he won't be there. Eli, you look like you're going to your own funeral, please. Can't you leave well enough alone? Can't we just have a family? No. In the corridor, he asked the nurse to lead him to his son. The nurse walked on one side of him, Ted Heller on the other. Eli, do you want some help? I thought you might want some help. No. Ted whispered something to the nurse. Then to Eli he whispered, should you be walking around like this? Yes. In his ear, Ted said, You'll frighten the kid. There, the nurse said. She pointed to a bassinet in the second row and looked puzzled to Ted. Do I go in? Eli said. No, the nurse said. She'll roll him over. She rapped on the enclosure full of babies. Peck, she mouthed to the nurse on the inside. Ted tapped Eli's arm. You're not thinking of doing something you'll be sorry for, are you, Eli? Eli, I mean, you know you're still Eli, don't you? In the enclosure, Eli saw a bassinet had been wheeled before the square window. Oh, Christ, Ted said, you don't have this Bible stuff on the brain. And suddenly he said, you wait, pal. He started down the corridor, his heels tapping rapidly. Eli felt relieved. He leaned forward. In the basket was what he'd come to see. Well, now that he was here, what did he think he was going to say to it? I'm your father, Eli the Flipper? I'm wearing a black hat, suit, and fancy underwear, all borrowed from a friend? How could he admit to this reddened ball, his reddened ball, the worst of all, that Ekman would shortly convince him he wanted to take off the whole business? He couldn't admit it. He wouldn't do it. Past his hat brim, from the corner of his eye, he saw Ted had stopped in a doorway at the end of the corridor. 2 interns stood there smoking, listening to Ted. Eli ignored it. No, even Ekman wouldn't make him take it off. No. He'd wear it if he chose to. He'd make the kid wear it. Sure. Cut it down when the time came. A smelly hand-me-down, whether the kid liked it or not. Only Teddy's heels clacked. The interns wore rubber soles, for they were there beside him unexpectedly. Their white suits smelled, but not like Eli's. Eli, Ted said softly, visiting time's up, pal. How are you feeling, Mr. Peck? First child upsets everyone. He'd just pay no attention. Nevertheless, he began to perspire thickly, and his hat crown clutched his hair. "Excuse me, Mr. Peck." It was a new, rich bass voice. "Excuse me, Rabbi, but you are wanted in the temple." A hand took his elbow firmly, then another hand the other elbow. Where they grabbed, his tendons went taut. "Okay, Rabbi, okay. He listened. It was a very soothing word, that okay. Okay, everything's going to be okay. His feet seemed to have left the ground some as he glided away from the window, the bassinet, the babies. "Okay, easy does it. Everything's all right. But he rose suddenly as though up out of a dream, and flailing his arms screamed, "I'm the father!" But the window disappeared. In a moment they tore off his jacket. It gave so easily in one yank. Then a needle slid under his skin. The drug calmed his soul, but did not touch it, down where the blackness had reached.